warm and fuzzy inside.
That's right here.
Thanks, bud. You know, if you're like me, you know, you probably thought of some tales of your own that you'd like to have told here at Grown Up Storytime. That door is always open for you, and even though the writers usually get credit for their work, so if that's something you like, I mean, you don't actually have to. I mean, there are plenty of writers who do anonymous stories all the time if you don't want that smoke. I mean, you know, don't feel like we won't protect your privacy here is all I'm saying. So, in fact, if you go to the Grown Up Story YouTube channel, which you definitely all should be subscribing to, so, you know, definitely go do that. You'll find all the stories from the archive, Grown Up Storytime, and there's some really great ones. My favorite is probably The Clinic. But the one I first remember, and I don't know if it's on there, the first story time I ever went to, there was like a story about like the ins and outs of having your asshole bleached. So, you know, Grown Up Storytime doth contain multitudes, you know. So, you know. All right, let's get this next story rolling. This one is called Love versus Caring, and it is read by the wonderful, the incomparable, the amazing Amanda Shih.
Love isn't conditional. Caring, however, is. Perhaps someday I'll write my own epic Grey Gardens tale of the relationship I've had with my mother. While being an only child can be a lonely experience, having a mother who would be a prime candidate for the show Hoarders creates a particular isolation from the rest of humanity. I hate the show Hoarders. It's always been just a way to glamorize someone else's extreme shame and mental illness. And while I understand the curiosity and our human penchant to seek out what disgusts us, what makes me cringe more are the people who seemingly delight in it. My mom's house is like a real-life haunted house, which might be why I hate going to the theatrical ones. There are bugs and spiders and cobwebs exactly where you would expect them, or perhaps where you wouldn't expect them, or would really hope they weren't existing, like inside the refrigerator or oven. There are too many cats and there are too many litter boxes that attract so many flies that there is actually an entire spider colony now, so I have to wear thick socks and long sleeves even in the middle of winter if I go inside. Up until recently, raccoons were residing in the attic without disturbance. The smell is unbearable, and I could spend a whole book describing in detail the other sanitary and heartbreaking details of this house, but for the sake of everyone's physical sensitivity to sensory descriptions of horror, we'll move on. I spent only 2 years living in this house, but the condo my mom had between being divorced and remarried was an identical environment, except, if I'm being honest, much worse, because it had carpets that bred thousands of fleas. I always asked to get to school as early as possible so that I could quickly change clothes in the restroom before any of my friends saw me because I knew I would smell otherwise. One time, I broke into the backstage dressing room to shower because the stink in my hair was so distracting that I was sure I would fail my final US exam if I didn't at least try to cover up the smell. Right after that incident, however, I asked my dad if maybe I didn't have to go back to my mom's house during the school week ever again. She obliged. For years, I just pretended with my mom that her house was just dirty, but not a crime or health crisis. Part of this was early on conditioning on her part. I grew up attached to a woman with a drinking problem who thought it was okay to prioritize the hangover over getting me to school on time. I do firmly believe that I became an educator and a bartender at the same time because schools always felt like home and bars are filled with familiar people. For years, I hated that my therapist would always couldn't resist a moment to stop me in the middle of my emotional rants to ask how my feelings connected back to being raised by my mother. Recently, my therapist recounted how loud and passionate my anger and pain from growing up with someone who could barely take care of herself was so intense that neighboring therapists knew to be careful scheduling their clients during my appointments. After a decade of mental health interventions, the result is that I've decided I have to stop caring. And before that sounds harsh, it's actually the most loving thing I think I can do. 2 years ago, the Home and Human Services Department was called because my stepdad, who is missing both of his legs due to diabetes complications, had fallen on the floor and was now exhibiting signs of sepsis and kidney failure. He kept asking not to go to the hospital until I showed up with a few friends, and while we weren't strong enough to get him off the floor, we became a physically united front against his psychosis, such that he finally allowed the paramedics to take him in. He almost died. I think about it a lot. I really do believe he had about maybe 30 minutes left of fucking around and finding out at home before the mortal coil would have slid him on out. And I don't really know how his body is so strong when he doesn't take care of it in even the small ways like hygiene and just not drinking pitchers of beers at a time. I don't believe there's a spiritual justice to why any of us survive or not. I do love him though, and I carry fond memories of him teaching me how to drive and picking up the phone when my mom was so mad she refused to speak to me. I can love my stepdad, but hoo boy, I'm still upset about how hard I had to fight him to get him help. I'm also deeply sad because I don't know what it's like to be a person who refuses help while at that store or something. I feel like I'm gonna try not to overanalyze my parents for the rest of the story. Wish me luck. So, 2 years ago, my stepdad went to the hospital and the Home and Human Services Department investigated my mom and my mom's house because the condition he arrived in and the reports from the paramedics indicated that the house he lived in contributed to him getting sick. He was eventually found to be suffering from typhus, which likely snuck in with the raccoons. Adult Protective Services stepped in and my mom was forced to hire a cleaning company to remedy the house before my stepdad could return to live there. My mom did not hire the cleaning company though. That was something she asked me to do. In fact, from calling me to let me know he'd fallen on the ground and needed help getting him up, she had asked me to handle as many things as possible. It was just too much for her. Her husband was in the ICU. Could I please handle APS? And I did, because my mom is also ill. One of her legs is likely at risk of being removed, and she is determined to be delusional about it. Her active illness creates a smell of its own that it's hard for people to be around. I know because I've had friends tell me they don't want to spend time with me if my mom is there. I know because I can also smell it. But every day she chooses delusion over solution. And because I don't want her to crumble into a million pieces, she has often indicated that she will commit suicide if she's not allowed to live her life without interference. I often step in to assist where she will likely fail. Sometimes that means coming by monthly to clean all of her litter boxes and take out the trash. Sometimes that means intercepting visits from APS so they don't notice too many odd things about the property to summon the health department to condemn the house. I'm going to wrap this up because I'm sensitive to stories leaving too much abandoned emotional baggage for other people to pick up. 2 years ago, the house was emptied out because the cleaning company I hired was terrible and threw away 90% of her belongings or allowed them to be stolen. Still, they did deliver a clean slate, and I left it as clear-cut as possible. She needed to hire people to help her keep her house clean. She has the means. Unfortunately, her desire to never have anyone other than me walk into the house outweighs her desire to actually want to keep a house that I would want to walk into. And sure, I can have compassion for someone who likely has extreme undiagnosed social anxiety among other mental blocks. But as someone who is passionate about not letting my pathologies harm others, I can also see that my mom is not someone who holds my well-being in mind when she leans into what her brain says she needs instead. Why solve her own problems if your daughter is doing it for you? So, I have to stop helping my mom. I can't be party to her delusions and behaviors and patterns anymore. I've tried healthy ways of communicating, toxic ways of communicating. I've taken her to see my therapist, who seems to have adjusted my treatment plan after meeting her. I've done a lot of dang work. But once I decided I didn't want to be dragged through the mud anymore trying to save a person who seems to throw herself back into danger again, well, I feel terrible, actually. The death or injury of any relationship has a physical sensation for me. It starts in my stomach as a sharp, throbbing pain that won't go away until I go out of my way to repair the damage. I see how that this pain was the conditioning. This pain was learned every time my mom showed me that I would only be a good daughter if I didn't raise a fuss about how bad things got. That I would be a golden child if I succeeded despite being sent to school smelling like a sour litter box. I wrote a long email describing my feelings and concerns with her that she claimed not to have received and is now actively trying to deny. This time, I'm steeling myself for the inevitable and repetitive no that will have to come from me for all of her requests. It absolutely sucks. But I won't stop loving my mom. I just have to stop caring. For the both of us. Thank you.